Okay, so we're going to take a look at erythropoiesis, which is red blood cell production. Just like the other formed elements, erythrocytes are formed in the red bone marrow, and they all the formed elements come from the same stem cell, which is called the hemocytoblast. So you don't have to know all these different steps, but you do need to know generally what happens. So the hemocytoblast is going to receive a chemical signal, and we'll talk about what that is in a little bit. And once it receives this signal, it's going to become what we call a committed cell. And a committed cell is just that. It's committed to becoming an erythrocyte. It cannot change its mind. So this committed cell is then going to enter into this developmental pathway. I don't really care that you know the names, know basically what happens. So it's going to enter into the developmental pathway. It's going to start synthesizing lots of ribosomes. Remember, ribosomes are what makes proteins. So after you have ribosomal synthesis, then you're going to have protein synthesis, and you're going to have large amounts of hemoglobin accumulating in the cell. Towards the end of the developmental pathway, the cell is going to eject the nucleus, so then it becomes anucleic. Once it ejects the nucleus, it's referred to as a reticulocyte. And that's the stage at which this cell enters the bloodstream. So it's going to circulate in the bloodstream as a reticulocyte for about 15 days, and then it'll be a full-blown erythrocyte. Erythrocytes have a very short lifespan. They live on the average about 120 days. Basically, because they don't have a nucleus, they don't have anything, so they have a short lifespan. Okay, so what regulates erythropoiesis is a negative feedback mechanism. The number of red blood cells in the body is constant. It's a balance between red blood cell production and red blood cell destruction. What you want to pay attention to is that what you're looking to maintain is normal blood oxygen levels. So you're not looking at the number of red blood cells, you're looking at the oxygen levels of the blood. So if you have a drop in oxygen in levels in the blood, then the tissues are going to experience hypoxia. And when the kidney, and liver to a smaller degree, but the kidney mainly, experiences hypoxia, it's going to release this hormone called erythropoietin, or EPO. So erythropoietin is then going to go to the target organ, which is red bone marrow, and it's going to stimulate the production of red blood cells. So you're going to have erythropoiesis as a result of EPO being present. So you're going to have erythropoiesis, and basically what that does is it increases the red blood cell count. So if you're increasing the red blood cell count, you're going to increase the overall carrying ability of the blood. So the thing about this is that the body's response is going to be the same. What I mean by that is when the cells experience hypoxia, the response is going to be to release erythropoietin and produce more red blood cells, even if the cause of the hypoxia is not because there's not enough red blood cells. There's other different causes of hypoxia. So, for example, it could be due to a decreased amount of red blood cells. Like, for example, if you had excessive red blood cell destruction, or if you were hemorrhaging, then you would have a low number of red blood cells. That would cause hypoxia. It could also be, you might have the right number of red blood cells, but maybe they don't have adequate hemoglobin. So you have decreased amount of hemoglobin. So the hemoglobin would not, if you have less hemoglobin, then you're not going to have as much oxygen bound to it. And then it also could be as a result of a decrease in the availability of oxygen. So, for example, if you're living at a higher altitude, or if you had pneumonia or something like that, the availability of oxygen would be decreased. So whatever the cause is, what determines the production of EPO or the release of EPO by the kidneys is hypoxia. So it can be because there's not enough red blood cells, it can be because there's not enough hemoglobin, or it can be that just the availability of oxygen is poor. So the fix is to release more EPO and get more red blood cells into the bloodstream. Also, you do have small amounts of EPO released at all times, and that's to balance. So this is production. It's to balance the destruction of the red blood cells, because they only live for about 120 days. Okay, so when you have low oxygen levels, that's going to stimulate the kidneys to produce the erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is going to go into the blood. It's going to target red bone marrow, and you're going to have erythropoiesis occurring, and you're going to have more red blood cells entering the bloodstream, and they only live about 120 days. As far as red blood cell destruction, so as the red blood cells age, they lose their flexibility and they become rigid and fragile. Hemoglobin begins to kind of degenerate, so their lifespan is about 100 and 120 days. Dead, abnormal, dying red blood cells are going to migrate to the spleen. The spleen is considered the graveyard for red blood cells. So they contain a large amount of macrophages that are going to phagocytize the red blood cells and break them down. So when they break them down, they're going to separate the hemoglobin molecule into a heme group and a globin molecule, and then the globin is going to be broken down into which individual amino acids, and that's going to enter the bloodstream, and then your body will use those amino acids to make other proteins. The heme group is going to be, the iron part is going to be salvaged, and it's going to be stored as ferritin or hemosiderin, so it can't just store it as iron, and that's going to be for future use. You also have bilirubin is an end product of this, and you have so bilirubin goes into the small intestine. It helps with bile production. Basically, what ends up happening is bilirubin is what gives your feces its brown color. So it's a brown-like pigment. That's a result of the hemoglobin being broken down. It's first broken down into what we call biliverdin, and then the biliverdin gets converted into bilirubin.